Hello, everyone. We're going to give it just a minute for folks to join. Happy Tuesday. We hope you are having a great start to the school year, and we'll get ready to start. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Sarah Marshall. I'm the Executive Director of Teach Indy. We're an education nonprofit here based in Marion County in Indianapolis, Indiana, that's really focusing on elevating and empowering educators to serve as change agents in our community. We're really excited for this first conversation that we are having this afternoon, really talking about back to school night, but on a larger scale about communication with that first interaction with families. I want this to be an interactive session today. So, if you have a question or a comment, please feel free to drop that in the chat, and we'll be able to share that with our great speakers that are joining us. And to kind of kick things off, we would love for you to share with us, um, you know, how. First off, where do you teach? What's your name? Where do you teach? Join us. And then what's the first word that you think of when you hear back to school night? What's that first word that just kind of pops into your head? Um, we'll bring everyone into the space, which will be fantastic. All right. Well, this fall we're going to be embarking on a journey. Continue to just drop those messages into the chat. But really, this fall we're embarking on a journey to talk about enhancing communication skills with teachers, and we're doing this by kicking off a conversation tonight with some amazing teachers that you're going to want to hear from in a two-part kind of series on communication. And we're going to be looking at insights from the field, valuable practical strategies that you can use if you have back to school night or any sort of parent communication coming up tomorrow, even as early as tomorrow. And I'm super excited to be joined by one of my all-time favorite educators here in Indianapolis. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her before I bring her onto the screen. So Dr. Carlotta Cooprider is an expert in all things education theory. She consults currently with districts to provide valuable insight and workshops to support transformational learning for educators. She is extremely multifaceted and provides a lot of field supervision for multiple colleges here in Indianapolis, with an emphasis on observing strategies for classroom management and dynamics of student engagement, stakeholder communication, and educator well-being, which is so important. Dr. Cooprider also works with the state of Indiana to support school performance audits and has over 25 years as a classroom teacher, a principal, an instructional coach. I'm telling you, every job that you can do in a school, I'm pretty convinced that Dr. Cooprider has done it. She has a proven history in leading initiatives related to teacher preparation, including serving as the founding dean for a residency-based education prep model here in Indianapolis. Her passion lies in cultivating teacher resilience through data-driven coaching cycles to identify and address specific needs. She's known for her ability to build trust with teachers and leaders, and I am so incredibly thankful to get to learn under her and with her and call her friend. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Dr. Cooprider to the stage with us. And Dr. Cooprider, welcome. So excited to see you this evening.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you. Awesome. It is great to be here. And wow, that was quite an introduction. I will name that my favorite role of all time is being a teacher. And there's no place else I would rather be tonight. So cheers to all the other teachers out there with us tonight. It's August. You're amazing. And actually a little bit beyond amazing. So grateful to have all those teacher voices in our and having this important conversation about back to school. So let's jump right in. I do see one comment here. The first thing that comes to mind is excited. Yes, excited. So good. I'm excited because we have some folks joining us, which I'll get to. But as we think about why we're all together tonight. I want to thank Teach Indy really for advocating for these opportunities to bring us together. And so however you're joining us tonight, we welcome you. We welcome your insights. My goal for tonight is to really zoom in and focus on the communication side of back to school night. Specifically, in my experience, communication is really the compass. The right communication strategies, I have found, build trust with the caregivers, the families, the parents, and also establish these really crucial partnerships, needed to learn. Uh, as Sarah talked about my background, as you can imagine, I've seen several back to school nights, and some were genuinely um, memorable in the sense that excellent conversations were happening. Parents were engaged. There was a discussion. It was authentic. And then there were some other ones that I kind of like to forget those even ever happened, right? So I would just call those, keeping in the growth mindset, these little tiny disasters that were learning opportunities. And so I want to dig in tonight. What's the difference, right? Like, what makes a memorable back to school night versus one that you would rather forget? And I think that one thing I've heard recently in talking with some educators is that sometimes our back to school nights can focus just too much on logistics. And if we can zoom in more on communication, and also really when you look at your why for teaching, right? So anytime at this back to school night that you can really share your why for teaching, any personal facts about who you are that demonstrates your confidence in the partnership, right? So for example, like if I was teaching writing, I might consider creating a visual that kind of links my content of writing to like a personal hobby. For example, I could show a picture of me doing some mountain climbing, some hiking, and including things that writing and mountain climbing have in common. Both require hard work and persistence, teamwork, trust, and even risk. And using this communication style I've just shared, right, a personal artifact about myself along with my expectations for writing. So that was a good example of a memorable back to school night for me. The ones that I would rather forget, I would say, really lacked that planning necessary, right, for communication. It'd be a breakdown. Either I failed to effectively communicate expectations for the evening, or I failed to communicate anything personal about myself. So as we jump into the conversation and get some more educators in the space, just take a few seconds and think to yourself, what is your ideal back to school night? And why is it more than just a meet the teacher night? Take about 5 seconds and just ground ourselves in those questions. All right, now that we have our intentions set and we know what our questions are for the evening, let's keep moving. Okay, joining us in the space now are two exceptional educators, and they are on the screen right now. Really appreciate having them here with me. And these individuals are volunteering their time tonight to be here with us to share not only their personal journey, but also to help kind of unpack some ideas, some best practices as we all start to think about back to school night. So welcome. Mr. McDade, would you mind opening us up, telling us a little bit about who you are?
Yes, thanks for having me, Dr. C. My name is D'Angelo McDade. I currently serve as an Algebra 1 teacher as well as an Associate Regional Director for Student Support. I originally started in the field of education in high school from the city of Chicago, and I'm really excited to be a part of this panel today.
Thank you. We're happy to have you. Ms. Comer.
Hello, hello. My name's Rebecca Comer. I taught for 2 years in Indianapolis and actually just moved back to my home state of Missouri, where I'll be teaching second grade. And I am really excited. My experience was with third, but I'm dropping down a grade and I'm excited to see the newness of it all.
Excellent. So we'll have a high school perspective. We'll have an elementary perspective. Ms. Comer, did you miss any of the Indiana State Fair this year? I wonder.
I
Mhm.
actually went to the Missouri State Fair instead, and call me biased, but I think it's better.
Okay. Mr. McDade, is there any communication you'd like to add to that comment?
There's not a fair like a fair from Chicago. I'm just going to say that now.
Okay. The World's Fair all started there. All right. All right, folks, I could talk about fairs all night, but let's get back to our conversation here. So, we know that as teachers, we count so many things, right? We count data, we count student data, we count attendance, we track standardized tests, we track formative tests, we track all kinds of things. But tonight, let's really think about not only those things that we track, but remember that words count. It's not just numbers, right? So as we think about these crucial conversations we're having, and we think about this back to school night, and we're going to really set the tone for some of this communication. So as you reflect on that, Mr. McDade, why don't we kind of maybe start with you tonight, if you don't mind kicking us off. Um, Pause, think about, can you describe your ideal back to school night? Maybe one you've seen, maybe one you wish you could do. What are your thoughts on that?
Whenever I think about my ideal back to school night, I think about an opportunity where our school leaders, who are our teachers, right, have the ability to communicate not only their leadership philosophy, but their teaching philosophy as well with our families. They share their school expectations, they support students and staff, and our families in setting goals for the year. This is an opportunity to not only emphasize the importance of building a strong relationship between the student, between the parent, and the instructional leader, because that emphasizes not only collaboration, but it emphasizes this ideal of being able to understand unique stories. This is a moment in which, as a teacher, you share your personal stories, your stories as being a teacher, those memorable moments that illustrates not only your commitment to student growth, but your commitment to the holistic development and collaboration with the parent and student.
Oh, thank you. Some things that you said that really stood out to me, and I invite our other participants to jump in the comment section. But when you said your leadership philosophy, I really appreciate that. I think about, it's so important. As a parent, I always wanted in my three children, I always wanted to see that what was the teacher's leadership style, because they are the leader of that classroom. They are the leader of those learning moments. So that stood out. I also heard the word stories. Thank you. Okay, same question. Ms. Comers, think about, what is your ideal back to school night?
Yeah, I think for me, I like the idea of a teacher being able to share their leadership philosophy, their teaching style. I also think that's hard if this is like your first year teaching. You're probably like, I don't
Mm,
know what that is. And
Snaps.
so then, because that was me, when that person said, someone said excited in the comments, I was like, for me, I'm nervous. Like, I'm always just a little bit scared. And I think
That's
that's
right.
okay because I also think a big part of back to school and like meet the teacher night is just giving the families a chance to talk to you about whatever they have. And that might be something that you had no clue needed to be discussed. It might be a little kid like talking about Pokemon for 10 minutes. And that's okay because it's back to school night and there's flexibility with that. But I think in terms of like the best one I've seen, a really like good method that stood out to me was one that happened like a few weeks after school had actually started.
Hmm.
And the woman who was teaching third grade math at my school, she set out like all these little Lego displays that the kids had done for their science projects to build a habitat. And it was so sweet because the kids got to come in with their families and they showed off their projects. And it was just a really great way to say, this is what we're learning. But like she gave the like power over to the kids to actually like show that to families instead of just a teacher.
Mm, that's really powerful. I don't know about you, Mr. McDade. I can almost see the little Legos there, right? And then, seeing those models, I'd want to know more, right?
Yes.
And also just the power of having the students work in front of you. And the other thing I heard you say, Ms. Comer, is just you left space in the agenda for the human side, right? The Pokemon side, the interest, things of that nature. So, yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I would feel like I want to stay with you for just a minute, Ms. Comer, and kind of dive a little deeper. You talked about this memorable moment, right, that you've observed, and how that created this authentic engagement. Is there anything you want to add to that about how that could build culture, establish trust, or is there another example? I just want to make sure that we have a chance to unpack your thinking. And if not, you maybe could talk to us about what goes into preparing for that.
Yeah, I think like in terms of back to school night, I always think beginning of the year. Like you maybe haven't had these kids yet. So when I think of like displaying student work, that's probably going to be more of like a parent teacher conference or maybe a special event that you do. And so in my experience, I think like the best things have either like special events or parent teacher conferences in which kids just to get to show off their learning. Like we've done presentation nights before where the kids get up in front of all their families and they present their projects and it's the sweetest little thing. And some people might not think like a third grader can do that, but they can. And whenever they do, their families are super impressed and they're impressed with themselves. And then you also get to be a little bit impressed with yourself because you're like, hey, we did it, like we made it. And so I think that that's a really good way to just get families involved. But it also doesn't have to be that big of a deal either. Like it doesn't always have to be an event. But I do think that that is like a really good starting point, especially if it's like a parent teacher conference or something like that.
Well, you kind of are bridging part one and part two. We're going to be talking about that coming up. But you know what you said that I really want to stamp that I hadn't thought of until this conversation is even at back to school night, letting kind of combining what you and Mr. McDade said, telling a story about where these second graders or third graders are going, where are they headed, and maybe even having some artifacts from the previous school year, right? So even if you don't have student work yet from, their student, you can say, hey, these are some projects we're going to do. Such a great reminder. Thank you for that. Okay, Mr. McDade, same line of thinking around this idea of building culture, establishing trust, preparation. What are your thoughts?
When I think about this question, I think about two elements, right? One, understanding the why of the teacher, but also understanding the why and perspective of our families. One of the greatest moments that I've ever seen from a back to school night was when the teacher opened up back to school night and put the question on the board, why are you here? And sometimes our whys and our perspectives.
Can we just pause for a minute? Oh, that is golden. Will you say that again?
Why are you here?
Yeah, good reminder.
We forget that why is in alignment with our families. And sometimes that why looks different. Sometimes that why looks as if our families want our students to have better lives in themselves, better experiences and better opportunities. But being able to understand those whys and being able to develop empathy, being able to identify that level of trust with our families, it not only shows that our teachers can be authentically themselves, but it also shows the commitment that we have to building and fostering that trust with our families and our students.
Both got me thinking. I am pretty sure I have never had anyone ask me why I'm here at back to school night. Thank you for bringing that up. I'm seeing some chats too about having the power of students and having information in their own words. And let me just read some chats here because this is super important. The power of students getting to show off their own work. Yes. Why are you here? Awesome. Okay, just making sure getting all the voices here. Any other final thoughts? I would say though, around preparation, because I can imagine people on this call, and I felt this way. You have limited time. It's August, it's September, you have a lot of things on your plate. How do you prepare for those kind of interactions? Anybody can go first here, just open.
Ms. Comer?
I was going to say, I think from an elementary's perspective, there is this pressure to like make everything really cute.
Hmm.
And I think, especially if you are a new teacher, like try not to give in to that. Like I've been going through my new classroom and I found like all these adorable little back to school night prompts of like sign your name here. Now don't forget to sign up for volunteering here. And I think stuff like that is really good. And if that's something that like fills up your cup, do it. But for me, that's not. That's just me like trying to make it look like I'm the good elementary school teacher who has it together. So in terms of preparing, like in terms of like showing off student work, even like if you know the first couple of books you're going to read in class, slap them down on a table, say, hey, by the way, kids, like these are the first books we're going to read. And then have your sign up sheet, sure, and whatever your district requires. But I just would ward against like going too in depth unless it is something that brings you joy. So that's all I'll say.
And that's why you are a tiny scholar wrangler, right? Keeping the academics in front of them. Good point with the books. Nice.
I think for me, from a high school perspective, as well as from a cultural studies perspective, um, every back to school night that I've typically experienced has happened before the school year has even started, right? And so one of the very first assignments that I typically provided our students with is a storytelling assignment where I send home this letter to our families and I say, hey, I want you to write a story with your parent, your guardian, your caretaker about who you are.
Mm.
And then when you bring that story into class, we are going to unpack who you are as a person, who you are as a student, but also who you are as a community member. Because in order for me to understand and in order for us to create a culture of learning, I have to be able to learn who you are first. And you have to be able to learn who I am. And so part of that assignment, I send home an exemplar about who I am as a teacher, telling a story about my why, telling the story about who I am as authentically as an educator and as a co-conspirator in your child's education. And I'm going to put an emphasis on this ideal of being a co-conspirator because partnership is one thing, but being a co-conspirator requires me to be in the same fight as you. And I have to be willing to tell that story, but live that story as well.
Such an excellent reminder, and really appreciate the way you both are focusing on identity and doing it in different ways, right? But keeping identity at the forefront of some of those conversations, even if you're doing it very literally or even figuratively, and getting people engaged and starting to think about that, especially our caregivers. So I think I could talk about this for a long time because you guys all had some great ideas, but we got to keep moving on. So we've started thinking about this what. Now let's, Mr. McDade, start, diving into the why. So let's jump in a little bit more about that why part. Gosh, for me, some of the connections I was trying to make with some caregivers in my back to school nights and some families, it was like herding cats, right? It was like I failed miserably, right? And then as I grew in my career, I realized that we were all failing miserably and we were all human and it was okay, and that really it wasn't failing. We were learning and we were growing as teachers, and we were getting feedback from our families and our caregivers, and we were implementing that feedback. So, as we go along here, Ms. Comer, what tips would you have for those early career teachers? I really appreciated your opening with your word around, nerves, anxiety, worry, like those are real, especially if you've just seen, the latest Disney movie with, all about the feelings. And I don't know if y'all seen that, but I really love that movie, and I really love the characters in there. So tell us more. What tips do you have about the early career teachers?
Well, I think in terms of connecting with families, one thing that most elementary school districts, I think, at least encourage is beginning of the year phone calls.
Mhm.
And I think especially if you did not see a family at back to school night, call home like within that first week, share like who you are, your teaching, like philosophy, as Mr. McDay was saying, things like that. And also just I was really bad at this. I have to write things down that I want to like say about their child before I call. Otherwise, I will ramble beyond belief. And so having just like a few talking points of like, hey, I noticed this, it was really sweet of him or her, and just going through that with them, I think is really good. I also don't know if that's super practical if you teach middle school or high school because you have upwards of 100 kids, whereas I have 26, right? So it's a little bit different. And I think I'm just going to go right into the second one. Sorry, Dr. C.
Do it.
But I think also like one thing that I wish I knew sooner, like looking back, and I'm still really new in this area, so I don't pretend to like have it all figured out now. But one thing is like parents don't expect you to be perfect. Okay, maybe some of them do, but the majority of them do not, right? And I think they understand that you are, you know, trying to figure out their kid as well. And like I like that term co-conspirator because it's like you're in this together. They don't expect you to have all the answers and they don't have all the answers either. And then on that same vein, I think parent communication, it can be really easy to overthink it. Whereas sometimes it's so simple to like, let's say you're at indoor recess and you take a picture of their kid doing something cute, send it to them. Say, hey, your kid was being cute today or whatever. And they'll love that. It doesn't have to be something that's like super impactful. It can just be an in the moment, like, hey, let me just show this to you.
Oh man, those are such great reminders. And I was thinking about back to that feeling movie Inside Out too, right? Like the joy, right? The joy that that would bring the parents. And also, when you were talking, I was thinking about, say, movie The Anxiety. And I hadn't really thought about it until you said it. But I think that sometimes we forget that our parents might feel anxious too about coming and meeting the teacher. Yeah. Mr. McDay, what would you add on this part?
I think for me, one of the major tips that I love to provide for early career teachers is one, being able to set those boundaries during back to school night. We know that teaching can not only be demanding, but it can also be taxing. I know for me, there are some times I'm at 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm thinking about ways I can support our students and how I can modify a lesson, but most importantly, be in contact with our families to support our kids. And so it's going to be very important to set those boundaries between work and your personal life during back to school night. And an example of that can be providing a tangible resources, providing families with a syllabus, listing out your expectations for the class, your office hours, your grading criteria. Putting all of this in front of the family also provides a roadmap for the family to acknowledge, like, this is how I can assure my students safety in this class. These are additional resources that I can access in order to ensure that my scholar succeeds. And I think on the latter part, one of the things that I wish I would have known sooner is that it is okay to make mistakes as a teacher. Um, Whenever I thought about communicating with families, my very first year, I had the goal of contacting 108 students and their families that very first back to school night. And so one of the things that I loved about my grad school opportunity was it taught me that I can necessarily divvy up how I'm contacting my families, but also necessarily figure out a way in which I'm communicating with my families based off their particular needs and based off their particular strengths. Um, I used to always do phone calls, and I used to call them strength contacts. And I would, before back to school night, I used to always look at my roster to try to figure out what students are going to be in my class next year. How have I actually interacted with that student? What are some things that I've noticed about them? And so I'm going to leverage those during the calls that I make with our families. Because one of the great things about speaking with our families constantly is if I'm able to identify a strength and something strong in that student, I'm able to build everlasting and strong relationships with our families.
Dr. C, could I add on that?
Please, yes. Tell us more.
I just love the way that you said strength contact because I think that's so important. And I think that's like the part, like the positive phone call, right? Because one really important thing that I will stand by is like, you do not want your first phone call home to be something the child has, because
Truth.
that's hard to bounce back from. And then also this piece about boundaries, I think is so important. Some of the best advice I got when I started teaching was to not respond to messages when I left the building. Because if you have like Class Dojo, or Seesaw or anything like that, where you can contact families like a text message, chances are they're going to be messaging you at like 9 p.m. And if you're like me, it's hard to ignore that. But if you just like draw that hard line of like, I'm not in my classroom, so this is not a right now thing, I think that's really helpful, because otherwise you can dig yourself a hole and you start messaging with a family who's maybe not happy with you, and it's 8 p.m. and you're like, man, how did I get into this? This is my personal time. So, all great points. Loved it.
Well, and what you both are bringing to the table is this idea of differentiated parent, family, caregiver communication, right? Wow. So many good pieces of wisdom here. All right, let's keep moving forward. It's about 6:31. And in addition to inviting everyone on the call to jump in, join the comments, want to also add another perspective here. So we've been talking a little bit about what, our educators are saying, what some of our personal experiences have been, but also want to make sure that we do include the caregiver perspective. We know that parents, caregivers have different perspectives, and their perspectives matter too, and can really impact our overall communication. So when I started thinking about this, I actually came across a resource, and you'll get all these resources tonight from Teach Indy as a follow up. But I have a resource that I came across. It was an article. It's in the June issue this summer of EdSurge, and it was titled "What 40 Million Messages Tell Us About Parent-Teacher Communication." And what was interesting about it is the analysis was that, and this, just to some context, this happened, during COVID, and it was talking a little bit about like how we were communicating. And I also really appreciate the context it was taken in is really looking at immigrant families and looking at low income families and school engagement in this time of crisis. And overall, what they found was that 44% of the message that parents were receiving was just dealing with logistics. And it makes me wonder how much that changed now. I would say, like, if I'm honestly reflecting on my own communication, it was mostly logistics, even outside of the pandemic. And then I also noticed in the research, it talked about 34% were just standard replies to another message, thank you, have a good day. So this study really points out to us that there's a large quantity of communication that happens with all of our technology, but really, is it quality? And how has this tech really changed how we talk with our families? And there's another resource we'll share with you that also, came out of the study is the founder of this nonprofit organization, Talking Points. The name is Lim, and they also do other work. And so in that same article, they reference a podcast, and it was amazing. A middle school teacher wrote a book about how technology really changed the family teacher relationship. And a direct quote was, in some cases, teachers may feel nervous or avoid interactions with parents, worried that it could be too time consuming or contentious. So if you want to hear more about what parents are saying, some of the research that's out there, I'd really encourage you to go to some of the resources that we'll also share, from this discussion tonight. And I'm going to take a look at comments here real quick and see if we have anybody else adding into our conversation. Yeah, it definitely, it's like times like this and in this conversation, just remembering this power of networking, right? Like some of the things we've heard from our guests tonight, I would not have thought of. And they're really ideas that you can all implement tomorrow. That's a really good point. Also, this idea of personal development is just as important as professional development, right? Making time for these personal conversations for teachers, by teachers, not only the conversation we're happening here tonight, but having this conversation going on well past this evening. All right, I think we checked in with most of our comments here. All right, let's kind of move to the final part of our discussion. It's about 6:35. All right. So this part I call what, so what, now what, right? So the idea here is I want to talk a little bit about like some resources, right? So we are in the next couple minutes going to have a link for some resources that you can use to sign up to get all of these articles that we're sharing tonight and some additional resources too. But what about back to our panelists? Like, so we've talked about preparing for back to school night, what makes it memorable, some little hacks that y'all shared. But what happens, what advice do you have for our listeners really on how do you continue to build the communication and engagement with the caregivers, with these families beyond back to school night? Anybody go ahead and jump in.
I can maybe repeat myself. I think genuinely part of like communicating with parents is being willing to just, it's for me, I've done a lot of messaging, right? That's what a lot of my parent communication is, especially on that elementary side, because I have used Dojo in the past, and this year I'm going to be using Seesaw. So it is a lot of messaging. And I think in terms of like communicating with them, it does you no good to overthink like what you're sending. Like if you need to say, hey, he's taking home some homework in his backpack, you can just say that. You don't have to like parse it down and make yourself sound really professional and like put together. And I think that saves everyone time, you know? And I think same goes for like sending them a quick little picture of their kid doing some work if they're having a good day. Like that's really powerful, and it doesn't have to be something that takes you a long time. And I think once you kind of get in the swing of that, it makes life a lot easier. But I also think that's like a learning process. It's like the whole thing with emails too. It's like you could spend a long time like going over an email before you send it. But I think if you plan on being a teacher for a while, you got to get in this habit of just writing it off and sending it. Like you can't take a lot of time to edit.
And
But
there it is, real tips from real solutions from real Rebecca. Thank you, Rebecca Comer, for keeping it real for us.
But I think it's just so important that families know that you are in their corner, you know, and that kids know that you're in their corner. Because you are not going to get anywhere with a child if they think you're working against them. And sometimes that's hard. Like sometimes you have a kid that you just can't quite figure out. But like everyone needs to be on the same team. Otherwise, the year's a wash. You know, you're not going to do anything productive. So I'll end there. Mr. McDade, take it away.
I got you. One of the very first things that I think about is parents always want to hear from you, regardless of if it is something positive, regardless of if it is an area of growth for our students. Parents always want to hear from you. I think the second part is when I think about communication after back to school night, we sometimes have to remember that just as we're educating the student, we're also educating the parent. Often within my communication, I'm always every week sending out a communication regarding attendance. I'm sending out a communication regarding where the student is academically in the class, so that if it gets to progress reports, if it gets to report card pickup, it's not a surprise to the parent. I'm also always looking for opportunities to invite the parent into my classroom, because this way I'm always providing an opportunity for the parent to get access to the educational materials so that they're able to support the student beyond the classroom. Our parents are just as much of a part of our classroom community as their students themselves.
Oh yeah. So yeah, that's so important. And I think about how in our teacher prep training, we don't even talk about this, right? And sometimes it seems like these kinds of things are just an event. And then we're busy, busy, busy until the next event. And what you both shared is how to keep this an ongoing conversation. So yeah, I really appreciate that. A lot of good ideas. The only thing I think I would stamp that you all said is just the idea of personalizing it. I've also heard this leaving space for two-way communication, right? And then also making sure you're leaving room for feedback, somehow getting parents' feedback. Is there anything that doesn't belong at back to school night? That just don't do that, right? Because you remember we talked earlier. I'm not sure what the word we would use back to when Sarah kicked us off with what word, but those ones we'd rather forget, those back to school nights that was like, don't ever want that to happen again. So what doesn't belong at back to school night? Any ideas there? Don't do this, right?
Don't display your personal bias.
Yeah.
Don't display your personal bias. We all have our opinions. We all have the way that we believe and perceive we should live our lives. However, in our classrooms, there are safe spaces.
Great reminder.
I think for me, this is something I'm bad at. So, like, don't make empty promises to families or students. Because I think it's really easy, like in those moments, like let's say they're like, oh, well, he'll really need some enrichment with math. It's like, oh, yes, I will absolutely do that for your child. You you can't say it with such confidence necessarily. You can say like, yeah, I'll look into that. But like get some like good little phrases down maybe to kind of practice because otherwise you might end up yeah, just not being able to deliver on what you said. And I feel like I have no one has ever called me on that, but I have definitely said things to families and I'm like, "Man, I never followed up on that." And like I dropped the ball there because I made an empty promise. And so I think that that's kind of important to know what you can and cannot do and say.
Yeah. And Ms. Comer, I appreciate you being so vulnerable tonight on like your own personal journey and that you're not there yet, but I love that you're thinking about how you can even get better. The only thing that I would add that I have heard recently is just don't bring in all the jargon from all the curriculum and all the acronyms and sometimes I think as teachers we're so full of all of those onboarding things ourselves and back to school and all the new programs and the jargon, and we're excited to share it, and I've heard from caregivers that can be confusing, it can be overwhelming, it can be intimidating, and just keeping it light, keeping it personal. One other quick resource as we are wrapping up tonight that I did want to share, and this will be again in the follow-up. If you are an educator out there and you are needing some posters, some free resources to put in your classroom to prepare for this event, you can go for Learning for Justice, a website, and you can download free classroom posters. They have all kinds there: Toni Morrison, Harvey Milk, Desmond Tutu, all kinds, bell hooks. So check it out. All right, let's keep rolling here. Gosh, this time goes by quick. It's already 6:43. All right, I am happy to say that we are at the end of our program in the sense that we have had an amazing conversation here. There is another resource that we will share in the follow-up, and it's another great article, Edutopias. It's got a couple of ideas on how to make it even personal. So kind of as a quick follow-up, if you want to know more, you can head there. But if you had questions about back to school night that you didn't get answered, please feel free to email teachindynow.org. And those individuals will respond to you and get those questions answered. And we really want to make sure that we save some time and some space for any other questions you all have. So with that, let me go ahead and pause and see what kind of questions we have out there.
I didn't see any questions at this point. I think partly because of the incredible educators that joined and shared all their wisdom with us today. So I think you all answered a lot of really important questions for us. So I didn't see anything in the chat as I was coming up.
Good. Excellent. Well, I do know that we have a link. Is that correct, Sarah? A Google Doc. So if individuals want access to resources, we do have something to share with them there.
Yeah, so in the chat, if you look in the comment section, we've dropped this a couple times, but if you're interested in links and additional resources connected to Back to School Night, Dr. Cooprider and also our panelists, and then the Teach Indie team have curated some resources that we'll be able to share. So fill out that survey for us, and we'll be able to share that information with you. Fantastic. Well, Dr. C, do you mind if I close us out this afternoon or this evening?
Yes, let's do it. Thank you very much again for hosting this.
Yeah. So again, we said, thank you so much. Make sure you complete that survey. I love this quote, Dr. C, that you shared. These conversations are so critical because we often don't get to have them. And so when we work together, just how much we can do when we're together, which I think is great. I also want to share that as teachers, we know that feedback is a gift. So if you've joined us this evening and you have any feedback to share with us, 2 different ways that you can answer a question for us to just help us make sure that these conversations are impactful and meet your needs as a teacher. So you can either scan the QR code here and leave your feedback, or you can join us on menti.com. Some of my teacher friends have probably used this. It's very similar to Kahoot. That's another great resource. We just have 2 very quick questions that you can answer for us to help us make sure that these conversations just keep getting better. And speaking of that, we have another conversation coming up with Dr. C and some amazing educators that will be on September 17th, which is another Tuesday. We really like Tuesday Teacher Talks, right? So join us again right back here at 6 p.m. on Tuesday, September 17th. And we'll dig a little bit more into that next step of communication that really the teachers alluded to today, which is family and teacher conferences. How do you make sure that those are setting everyone up for success, the student, the family, the teacher, and really the whole unit as a whole. So again, I just want to say one final closeout. Thank you so much let me get you all on the screen. Thank you so much to our educators for sharing your wisdom tonight. You are brilliant and everyone will benefit from your words. And Dr. Cooprider, thank you to you as well for spearing and leading our conversation this evening. We look forward to future conversations.
Thank you for putting this on, guys. It's great.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone.